Welcome to the SAG-AFTRA Foundation's Conversations at Home. I'm James Patrick Herman. It's critical our audience know the SAG-AFTRA Foundation has a COVID-19 relief fund to support SAG-AFTRA performers who are in urgent need as this pandemic continues. Since March of 2020, the foundation has given nearly $6 million in aid to over 6,300 performers and families facing extreme hardship. If you are a SAG-AFTRA member and you need help, please ask. And if you are able to help support our community in this crucial effort, please give. Information can be found in the description of this video. It's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Marc Maron, Johnny Flynn, Jena Malone, and Gabriel Range.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you all for joining me today. Gabriel, I guess I'd like to start with you. What, I guess at this moment in time, what inspired you to do this movie?
So I'd written another movie about David Bowie and Iggy Pop's year in West Berlin together, which was when Iggy and David shared a flat in West Berlin in 1977. And that movie was kind of tricky to put together because we needed all the music. And the producers on that movie said, you know what, there's a script that these guys have that is about the first time David went to America. You know, you should meet them and talk to them. And I did. And Chris Bell had written a script that was, basically this sort of series of anecdotes of David's first trip to America. Basically, I guess, it was really appealing to me because it was about a time before David was famous, when he was not the sort of star that he became. He'd had 12 failed singles. He'd had one record that was basically dismissed as a novelty record, and he kind of was still very much trying to figure out his identity as a performer. And what struck me, I as a kid was a huge Bowie fan, fascinated by Bowie as an adult, as a sort of human being, and then what always surprised me was how little people seemed to know about his family life and about, his half brother, for example, and also how little I knew about the early days, when he was just starting out. So this, I guess, this first trip to America felt like a David Bowie that actually most people probably hadn't seen and didn't know.
And I have to say, these days, when a musician comes to the States, they have VIP services. They just kind of whisk right through customs. I thought it was so hilarious, the idea of, David Bowie or David Jones arriving at customs and having to explain himself to a customs official. It was so surreal and hilarious to me, and that he gets quizzed about his sexual preferences. It's just fascinating. Where did, that scene I just think is so brilliant. Where did you get the idea for that?
Well, so that's all true. I mean, basically David rocked up here without the right paperwork. He didn't have a visa. He didn't have the musicians union paperwork. And so, he came to play a tour he thought that he couldn't actually perform a single, note of. And, I mean, one of the thrills for me in being working with Johnny, who besides being an incredible, extraordinary actor, is a very talented musician. One of the joys of casting Johnny was that Johnny could kind of relate to that experience of coming to America when you're not a star, of sort of just setting out and all the uncertainty and kind of weirdness that comes with that.
Although Johnny probably didn't bring a dress the first time you came to the States. I love that they go through his luggage and he explains that actually the dress he brought with him is a dress made for a man. It's just so hilarious because, we take that kind of gender fluidity for granted nowadays, but at the time it was so shocking and radical. And I love the way that you played that, Johnny. Can you also talk to me, Johnny, just a little bit about what kind of research you did for this based, or I guess contrasting with what you did for Albert Einstein, which was probably a very different approach?
Yeah, although in both cases it was playing somebody kind of before you knew them, you know, before all the footage exists and before the personality that we recognize is there. So there was, you know, it's nice because there's a bit more imagination. You know, there's a few interviews from him from this period. There's a bunch of, I mean, what I really liked was finding radio clips of him talking, because you can hear that vulnerability. There's a definite sense of humor and a wryness, and that some kind of classic Bowieisms, but there's something like he doesn't know what the fuck is gonna happen. You know, he doesn't think he's gonna make it at this point. There's a kind of world weariness, which is, you know, ironic for somebody at the beginning of their career. But he's already been trying to make it for so long at this point, and he's failed. I mean, there's a bunch of stuff that Gabriel pointed me towards. There was a brilliant BBC documentary that came out just before we made the film called Finding Fame. There's loads of clips that are hard to find. Like there's like an audio of his concert that he did at Glastonbury when like just a handful of people that were there in like 1970 or 69 or something. And it's brilliant. He just sounds so fed up of nobody turning up at the shows. You know, it's definitely the Bowie that we don't know. So with both him and Einstein in these situations, it was a bit of imagining, you know, what it would be, which is fun. So I like that.
I love the relationship so much with you and Marc's character. It's hilarious. But I wondered, Gabriel, did you have any thoughts about, you know, what I'm picking up in terms of references to like road movies or buddy comedies?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing to say is that, you know, it's sort of, we knew from the start that we wouldn't have the music, and that was actually, it felt really like a blessing, because it meant that, you know, there was no pressure for it to become a spin through his greatest hits or some sort of, you know, jukebox movie, you know, and that actually meant that we were able to make something that felt a little, you know, more offbeat, a little more intimate, you know, and that was much more about, you know, him as a human being rather than the music, you know. But yeah, I mean, I when I first, you know, started thinking about the project, the sort of my fantasy casting in my head was Marc and Johnny. So I'm Jena, the three, you know. So I'm sort of absolutely thrilled and blessed to have got my three, you know, sort of people that I saw the very first time I started thinking about the movie.
And Marc, tell me, your performance reminded me of so many music publicists that I actually know and have actually worked with over the past 25 years. I just wondered, did you know, base it on anyone in particular from, you know, from your experiences?
Well, you know, I've been in show business a while, and you meet these people, and there's a certain type of a pushiness that a publicist generally has. But I think that the difference is, you know, and also the creativity of trying to figure out, I think that really comes through where he's trying to get these gigs together and sell them to David, and, you know, get him whatever he can to sort of get him out doing something, and really kind of spinning it into something that is, you know, better than it is, obviously. But I think the difference between this guy and I think some publicists, I think there was more of an A&R quality to him, in that, you know, his belief in the artist was so strong. Whereas I don't know that all publicists have that necessarily if they're company guys. But this guy was sort of, you know, off to the side, you know, obviously on his way out in some ways of being a company guy because of his belief in where music was going and the resistance he was getting from labels and the sort of power of the label. So I think that, you know, his publicist persona really comes out when he's trying to sell David on this idea that these things he's having him do are in any way good. He's doing the best he can, and he's, you know, he's using these connections. But I think that the belief in David was something that I could identify with. You know, you got a guy who's like capable of doing amazing music and capable of doing something new, and kind of, you know, he sees that before the world does. That was compelling to me. And also the idea that it wasn't going to, you know, take on the biopic thing. That was I hate when people call this movie a biopic, or they respond to it on social media as this, that there's that it's a biopic. It's not. It's a movie about a few weeks, maybe a month or two, really, in flashbacks, but it's really a slice of life. It's not a biopic, and that was what made it appealing to me, was to engage on this level.
That's interesting. That would have been a better question. I should have asked you all how what language you all use to talk about, this film, because I do think it does, a disservice to describe it as a biopic, although I certainly learned more about David Bowie from this than I did from anything else I've seen. But I'm curious, like, how do you all see this movie, especially like Jena, like you're playing also a very well-known figure. And, the way that I think the wives of rock stars are traditionally portrayed in movies about iconic musicians, this is also so refreshing because, they're often seen as these kind of tragic figures. I'm thinking, of course, of, Freddie Mercury's wife and Elton John's wife. It's just so refreshing the way this role is written, and you really take it to another level. I loved your performance so much. It's really, about the ideas of what a marriage could be, the potential of marriage, and the potential of a partnership. I just thought it was, because you're so much more. You're really like sort of, his manager and also sort of like his publicist in a way, as well as his wife. I just wondered, how did you approach and think of this role?
Well, first off, your first question, there's really no right or wrong way to describe a film, right? I mean, biopic is just a sentence that we use to help us as audience members to navigate Netflix, I mean, when you say slice of life, I mean, it's all interpretive. And I never think of a film as needing to have to be described, only because it's not my job as a storyteller to describe it. It's the audience's, right? So an audience gets to walk away from this film saying, oh, this is what it means to me. And like you said, you actually felt like you received information, as a biopic would tend to think that's what the definition is you receive biographical information. And you do. This is sort of an unknown time in his life, But in regards to their partnership, I mean, it's just so interesting how every success story, it's never a solo journey, right? I mean, it's like energy. Any energy that makes an impact, it's like a comet, It's full of like the dust and debris of so many other human interactions, bodies, choices, and it's like this bright thing in the sky that has a trail of all of this gathering momentums and energies. And I think that between David and Angie, there was like something ignited. Right? She saw something special in him. He felt special in her eyes. I mean, it's a very modern partnership in that way.
Right.
Where some of the very first things, even in the actual space of when they met, the first kind of relationship things that they did was work oriented. They fell instantly into a work relationship where they fed off being creative and looking at the world through that lens. They shared that, and that was really like a bond that tied them. But yeah, Angie was a very modern woman, and as you were describing in the beginning of the with your first question about the TSA interview, is that you realize how really irrelevant time is, because you see these types of relationships between, David and Angie and, our relationship to gender identity. And, people were asking the same questions, 60 freaking years ago. Like, we're just spoiled at this point. We're there's an overabundance of information and awareness, and to think that, these types of modern women were so not heralded at their time, and they were considered what? Bitches, crazy, psychopaths,
Exactly.
Insane. But really, she had a really incredible thing to offer David. And I think that he really excelled under her gaze in a lot of ways,
that's, you know, and that's what I was sort of getting at. It's so refreshing that she is sort of given the credit that traditionally I think she has been denied for her role in, you know, David Bowie, right? And that's what's so beautiful about this movie. You know, his actual manager is pretty useless, right? Like, didn't even get him the proper paperwork so that he could perform on his tour of America. And it's really, you know, the publicist who actually acts much more like a manager, and his wife, who really were responsible for, you know, the persona that we, you know as David Bowie, which was just as much a performance as, you know, probably the better known personas, right? Like Ziggy Stardust. And I just love the scene like with Lou Reed that sort of explains that. I mean, it's not Lou Reed, it's someone playing Lou Reed, which David doesn't realize. I mean, could you talk a little bit about that? I thought that was so brilliant. That
wasn't even supposed to be Lou Reed. It was Doug Ewell, wasn't it?
Right.
Yeah.
And I love your reaction, like just the conversation you two have. Would you just talk a little bit about that? I thought it was just so brilliant.
The weirdest thing for me in dealing with how, like, I didn't know anything. I knew some stuff about Bowie. I knew some stuff about Lou from reading Please Kill Me. Like, that book changed my life. You know, The Oral History of Punk, it's the best book in the world about these guys because it humanizes them.
You're shaking your head, Gabriel. Like,
no, I'm saying it's a great book.
oh, okay.
It humanizes them in the worst of ways. And the thing about like dealing with my experience with Johnny and my experience with this story is like, it was hard for me to see David Bowie as such a kind of naive guy, as sort of this kind of like, you know, open book that, you know, he couldn't hide his vulnerability no matter how hard he tried. And for me to really believe in those moments that he didn't know what the fuck was happening was difficult. And when I got tired of the mime routine, you know, it was like, it was hard for me to sort of picture that someone like David Bowie could ever be this kind of like, you know, thinking that he's getting over when he's not. But then when you really think about it, why wouldn't he be naive? How would he know all these things? You know, how he doesn't know how to play the game yet or any of it. He has no idea who he is on so many levels. So in that scene, for me, it was just, it was sort of hilarious to be able to take a shot at his innocence and his naivete. Well, you know, why wouldn't I? That really, my becoming annoyed with David Bowie by the time I lose my shit on the highway is the whole build of that dynamic.
And Gabriel, I love how you chose to play him. You know, it was at first surprising to me because that's not how I think of David Bowie. But then I realized, oh, well, you're playing David Jones, and I really don't know anything about David Jones. And you have, you know, for an artist, you have a real dilemma. You know, this album was all about David's, you know, brother and mental illness, which is something else that makes it very timely. And yet that was too personal for David to talk about. So, you know, it's such a predicament. How do you talk about an album that's too personal to really discuss? And, you know, so your character plays these, you know, sort of games during the interviews. I just thought that was just so fascinating.
I mean, I think that's a fair kind of depiction of what happened on that trip. You know, I think he found that, you know, he could sing about that stuff. He just couldn't write it. You know, he couldn't talk about it. And you know that, you know, in there are plenty of interviews where David is asked about, you know, I mean, in reality, there are print interviews and, you know, broadcast interviews from the time when he's asked about the album, and he'll just, you know, sidetrack to something else and say it's about drugs or it's about, you know, something completely different. So, you know, and he subsequently acknowledged that was a really, you know, he found all that really tough to talk about. Because I think that fear of mental illness that was so kind of present on The Man Who Sold the World was really, you know, sort of, it was a thing for him in that time. You know, it was very, I think it, you know, was very present for him on that trip.
Johnny, what was the key for you in terms of finding this character? And, I think it's very daunting because not only did you play David Jones and David Jones playing David Bowie and then David Bowie playing Ziggy Stardust, but you also wrote and performed a song that you wrote in the style of the Velvet Underground. I just think, wow, that is so daunting. You're a very fearless young man.
Yeah, that was fun. I mean, it was cool to. There was a moment that we needed a song for, and I thought, and I'm doing all this work on my voice and my movement, and I'm trying to lose weight and all this stuff. Why not, write a song as an acting? That's what he's doing at this time. So I might as well try and do that from his mindset if I can. But it was fun because it didn't have to be a great song, because at this point he's trying to rip people off in a kind of, he's wearing all his influences too much on his sleeve. He's either playing covers of Jacques Brel or whatever, or he's copying people in a way that's too obvious. So he hasn't found his own distinct thing. I mean, for me, it was really Gabriel. I know the Bowie that we all know, like the one that you're talking about. And then we were doing some scenes early on as a kind of test, and Gabriel kept pushing me towards a much more insecure, vulnerable place. And I found that so interesting. It was way more than like, I'm quite a retired, shy person in real life, but he was pushing me to a place that was like so raw and so vulnerable, and I thought that was really thrilling to go through that out to a place where I didn't know what was going to happen, or and I didn't know who this version of Bowie was, and then be that vulnerable in those situations that we know he was in, at the border, or playing these gigs, or trying to please people, or strike up this relationship with Ron Oberman or whatever. And so that was a key thing, just being that vulnerable.
I have to say, your final performance scene, I thought your transformation to me was just as convincing as, Renee Zellweger doing Judy Garland. It was really remarkable. If someone told me that was like found footage, I would have totally believed it. I mean, Jena, you're in that final scene, and I love, your final interaction with him, where you just say, "Good luck, darling." What did you think watching, that performance?
I mean, I felt the same thing. I came to set, I was like, all right, get out of hair and makeup, I had to stumble in somewhere, and literally we're in like an old venue, it's all dark, there's like smoke machines, and there's like a fucking incredible band on, and I'm just like stumbling around through film equipment being like, what the fuck? Like, how is this possible that I'm witnessing something that I never would have been able to witness in my lifetime? It was incredible. I was hanging out on set like the whole time, even when they didn't need me. I was like, okay, they're like, Jena, could you move? Like, this is like, we gotta like move the crane. It's like, it was really cool. I mean, those are like, once in a lifetime opportunities as an actor, when you get to
really
see
fun
and
day.
experience something.
It was such fun. Yeah, it really was.
But I love those reaction shots, both your character and Marc's character. Those reaction shots to me were so powerful, because you're both sort of witnessing, the results of your influence on his, on his music, on his persona, on his art, on everything. And I just wanted to ask you, what research did you do, specifically into Angie, or how did you approach, this role? Because I feel like you really nailed her.
Thank you. I don't know. It was a very strange one. I mean, playing someone that's alive and historical, whilst also it's sort of it's not that it's an unknown time in her life, because it's actually a highly documented time, but because who she's sort of become is such a different woman in a lot of ways, as we all do, like I'll be a different woman at that age as well. it was sort of like trying to have a blinder a bit, like not wanting to know too much about, you know, the woman. It was like some sort of weird future mind fuck where I was like, okay, let's just go back. I don't know. I worked with Gabriel a lot. I read Backstage Passes, which was this book that, you know, she wrote about that time in her life. And that was really helpful in understanding sort of her story outside of, you know, sort of pre-David in a lot of ways. But honestly, you know, for me, you never know how you're going to have that aha moment for a character, right? And for every actor, it's different, and you actually can't plan it, right? So sometimes it's the wardrobe or the character or rehearsal or footage or something. And I remember watching a video of hers from the time that she released one of her records after she left, after David and her split. And I was so enthralled with the way that she was speaking. What is it when you like screen grab video, whatever? I'm such a, you know, whatever that is. And I did it. And then I realized that it didn't record the audio, you know, because it just records the video. And it was like this 15-second clip. And I must have watched that clip 1,000 times. I was enthralled with it. And for some reason, because there was no audio, it allowed me to open up this space where like I was more free. Like it gave me, I don't know, this like body instructions to kind of inhabit her whilst also like kind of there's a clean slate, you know? So that's sort of where, I don't know, how I found my entryway in.
Wow. Well, again, I loved your performance so much. And Gabriel, you know, what kind of work did you do on your voice? Again, I thought,
Gabriel?
you know, I thought it was so eerily perfect.
You mean Johnny? Hey.
Oh, I'm sorry, Johnny. Yeah, all right.
I was like, well, Gabriel doesn't work on his voice. Right. I think it's just naturally like that.
I worked on Gabriel being my voice. I mean, the thing about David, yeah, this is an important thing. I think it's like he's a different person in every single clip that you ever see of him, every interview. Like he leans on a kind of fey kind of Englishness in certain situations. He kind of played on being a very well-spoken, polite kind of. He loved that thing of like dressing, you know, all kind of punky and then being very sort of, you know, polite. That was like a kind of, it seemed like a delicious juxtaposition for him. Or at times he'd be kind of playing up to being a sort of braggart, you know, in your face kind of, I don't know, Londoner. Yeah, it was fun. It was fun knowing that there was some license to be a different person in each situation. He was a chameleon, social chameleon, and yeah, especially turning up at the customs thing. You know, I think it's fun that he thinks it's going to be a situation he can kind of flirt his way through, and then horribly badly. Yeah, but I listened to tons of interviews, especially anything I could find from the period. And I worked with a voice coach who I'd worked with before, and he was finding me references that he'd learned David was influenced by, you know, he was obsessed with Lauren Bacall. He'd watch film footage of Lauren Bacall and study her movement and her voice and things like that. So stuff like that, stuff that David was into rather than just watching David.
Interesting. That's actually one of your lines, right, Marc? Doesn't the Rolling Stone reporter say that he looks like Lauren Bacall, and you say actually he's you know.
That's a elbow.
Yeah, which I love. That whole scene with the Rolling Stone reporter that's such a great scene, and you know, him being so jaded and you trying to sell, like the idea of someone having to sell a Rolling Stone reporter on David Bowie is fascinating like that ever, you know.
And also realizing the power these guys had at that time, you know. Yeah, especially now in this fragmented media universe where everybody will do anything if they're asked, out of the sort of just the possibility of something getting traction that they may not know about. It's sort of tragic, but I guess it's the democratization of of media. So we're all enabled to do whatever we want to do in our backyard and hope for the best. But at that time, when those guys had real power, I mean, it was, these lines were drawn. So this poor schlep of a guy, my character, Ron Oberman, who obviously had his own reputation as being, somewhat of a, kind of a, aggravated, desperate guy, champion of the underdog, who was not really looked well upon in the industry, to kind of, have to fight these Goliaths to, sort of give this guy a listen. Yeah, it was sort of stunning, but I don't know that I think I just played everything as in the immediate sense, in terms of how he would have approached these guys, just sort of like a publicist. And I think if anything, that's what you saw as something you could see was something you've seen before in other publicists, was this weird determination, despite knowing the dynamic, this fundamental lack of respect, beneath, the determination to land his guy. So that was fun. Yeah. But I think the reason Gabriel picked me is that no matter how confident a character like Ron Oberman gets, he's always going to be, you're always going to sort of see through it to the kind of weird, desperate sadness a guy like that has. So it was nice.
And yet he clearly had a real passion for music.
Yeah.
Which is so true of every, music publicist I know. And I love your dialogue so much. I'm just curious, was anything improvised, during kind of the road trip portion, or was that all in the script? But your interactions are just so hilarious, really.
I don't remember. There must have been some things improvised a bit, but most of it was written, right, Gabriel?
It was pretty much to the word, yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, it's so beautifully written.
Yeah, he was a stickler for that. He's one of those directors. We've only got one take, maybe. So could you try to get the lines right? Because we've got to run to another set in a minute.
That's the other thing to say, is that we shot this movie in like 5 minutes. I mean, it was the most crazy short shoot.
Crazy. He was doing one take, sometimes like 2 takes. One take, and it's like, okay, moving on. I'm like, what? How are you moving on? It's like, did you get it? It's like, yeah, we got it. I'm like, all right, whatever you say, pal.
Wow, you would never know that. You would never. How many weeks? I'm just curious. How many weeks was the shoot?
Well, kind of 2 and a bit.
That's unbelievable. I literally cannot believe that, because again, it's just a credit to all of the performances, because you really feel like significant time passes in terms of how the characters develop.
I mean, what I love about these guys, and what was just so amazing, was everyone, especially Johnny, Jena, and Marc. That everybody knew that time was so short, and that just produced this real focus. So, they were just so on it. So I'm so grateful for their kind of incredible, intense focus on because there just wasn't time to do it more than,
And also that you got that wizard on the camera.
It was like doing theater almost.
Yeah. But with Nick on the camera was amazing.
The other controversial thing is, for a movie that you have to shoot in 2 and a bit weeks, I had a 79-year-old cinematographer. He's deaf, but anyway, he did a great job. Yeah.
Well, the stakes are all very high for all of the characters. Angie's basically facing the end of her marriage. This is really going to make or break David's career. And, similarly, Marc's character is potentially facing the end of his career, you know, depending on whether or not he can break David Bowie in the United States of America. Like, despite the fact that he can't perform any of his songs, I mean, the stakes could not be higher for all of these, you know, characters. So it's just remarkable to me that you achieved such a rich film in such a short period of time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And you know, again, I think, you know, Johnny, you have the toughest job because, you know, at the end of the film, you've really found your confidence and found this persona that you're comfortable with. And I just thought that must have been a very difficult job as an actor, not only playing, you know, this character, but playing this character's persona. How did you, like, I guess, think about that?
I mean, that day was, you know, looming in the schedule for me, or the, you know, I think it was basically a day, the concert day, we had a venue booked, and they'd put an advert out in a local Toronto newspaper, and there was like a few hundred people, you know, members of the public just invited to turn up and kind of have a party. And I didn't know how it was going to go. I didn't know what I was going to do. I'd been practicing some moves in my hotel room. I mean, it was kind of intense, but actually I just surrendered to the music. I mean, the one thing I do know, or I have experience of, is being in front of a crowd in a gig situation. And you know, it was fun for me because when I play music live as myself, I don't dress up or dance, or, you know, there's no adornment. So it was really cool to, you know, but I have friends who do that. And I always, I have a friend who's this guitarist, Anna Calvi, and she wears like crazy costumes and goes wild. And she's a very softly spoken person, but she kind of lets rip on stage. And she always said, you know, don't you want to just like explode on stage? And I was like, nope. So this is my chance to try it out, and it felt pretty good. But, you know, yeah, I don't know. I tried to let go as much as possible and let the music kind of do its thing. But it was fun. It really helped having like a few hundred people to play to. That was the thing.
Was the acoustic number that's very like up close, was that daunting compared to, you know, the more kind of overtly rock performance that you give?
No, that's, I mean, I guess that's more like the thing I normally do, you know, sit on a stool or whatever and sing songs and, you know, think about the lyrics. But it's cool because there, you know, there's so much, there is a lot of footage of Gabriel, oh my God, everyone's calling him Gabriel.
It's not just me.
There is, you know, there's the brilliant Pennebaker film of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars, which was the last Ziggy gig. So there's this amazing concert film of that time, and a lot of what we were doing in the gig was based on that film, just because that's the best examples of it, and some of the backstage stuff with Angie and getting dressed and everything, sort of referencing that film a bit. So, you know, the moves and the atmosphere of the stage, you know, we think about it as all a crazy show, but actually it's a pretty bare stage with pretty simple light settings, just these wild characters in wild costumes doing with crazy hair, just playing this brilliant music. It's actually quite sort of simple, really. And I just, the pressure was to know, was to find an energy. But the crowd helped so much because they were, you know, Gabriel had them kind of whipped up in this excitement, and they were, you know, reaching out for me. They were so up for it. I mean, they were basically, it was a load of people on like first dates trying to show off in front of their prospective boyfriends and girlfriends, basically, and having fun, which was cool.
But, you know, Gabriel, again, I thought it was so fascinating that you focused so much on mental illness in this film, which is something that made it feel very modern. And the discussions about, schizophrenia. Why did that subject matter appeal to you?
Well, I think in a way, it's no coincidence that David spent most of his career as a series of different personalities. So he, after Ziggy Stardust, there's Aladdin Sane, there's the thin white dude, and then that constant process of transformation, I think, has a lot to do with this period. I think you can trace it all back to this time when I think David was really scared that he would end up succumbing to schizophrenia. I think it was just really interesting to me that family background would have such a huge influence on his career, because I think, David, he had 3 aunts who were schizophrenic. And then obviously Terry, his half brother, was such a big influence on him growing up. Took him to his first gigs, bought him his first records. And then, for him to have that sort of catastrophic, breakdown when David was 18, 19, or in his early 20s, that had a huge effect on David. And so I guess, there's a sort of, I think there's an argument you can make that David kind of adopted those personas, out of a place of need, not out of, not just because he thought it was cool. They sort of came out of this sort of deep need. And that need was to kind of almost, avoid becoming a case of multiple personality disorder himself, And so that to me was just really interesting, because I think that's, a lot of that is why I think Ziggy Stardust, has been so enduring as an alter ego. It's like, that's why I think he's, that extraordinary process of reinvention, I think, is tied into that sort of fear of mental illness.
And that's one of the reasons that Bowie was such an important artist. And your film, brings up the idea of identity. And, at the end, the identity he's chosen is an alien, which is a great metaphor. But I think it's interesting, the commentary on identity, because we're, all talking about identity politics now. And I just thought that was such a fresh angle on, an iconic artist that hasn't been, I think, talked about, enough really. And the challenge for Marc's character is that Marc's character doesn't realize that he's not comfortable talking about any of that. So not only is he, fighting with journalists to get some press on his artist, but he's often fighting with the artist because he doesn't understand why the idea of authenticity also is so interesting. He doesn't understand why David's not comfortable being his authentic self. And you don't really, find out till the end. And I just thought that was, beautifully done. But what were your thoughts on that, Marc?
Well, yeah, I guess, I was bringing some of my my own self to that moment where, you got a guy like Ron Oberman who really, by nature can't help but be himself. It's probably his best and his worst attribute. So, for somebody, like that, who's just sort of an out front kind of like, what the fuck is your problem, man? To not understand, well, first, British in and of itself is problematic in terms of expressing any sort of inner life or authenticity on an emotional level. So I think I probably innately got that. But I think in those moments, what really became clear, and I think what happens in the film, was that on top of the building was that realization that he had no idea how to access that, whether it was shame or fear or whatever, that he even, you got to know who you are in order to fake who you are, right? To a certain degree. So that moment where I tell him, you got to choose who you are, I think in that moment I realized that he's got no way to address this stuff because he's terrified. And there was nothing, it wasn't a cultural thing, and it wasn't, you know, a choice. It was just that, like, he was terrified of what the implications of accepting the possibility of being mentally ill were. And, you know, I don't think that my guy could fathom that, when I'm just sort of like, you just got to rock, man. Come on, open it up. So I think that moment on the roof was really kind of that moment where I realized, like, well, there's nothing I can do to help him access whatever's holding him back, but offer him the advice of making a choice about how he wants to be in the world.
Did Angie Bowie, like, did she suffer from postpartum depression? I mean, did you think, in terms of mental illness, did that, you know, occur to you at all when you were playing her?
I mean, I don't know what mother doesn't, to be honest. I think that postpartum depression is a highly misunderstood thing. I think it's actually a physical reaction to the physical, emotional, spiritual trauma of giving birth. And I think it's a natural way for your body to heal itself. It's like, you know, it's like Inside Out, that movie that my son's been wanting to watch 17,000 times. And sometimes it takes a deep well of sadness to really sit with it, to be able to heal yourself, to come back to a more neutral state. And I think, yeah, so that's definitely 100% she did experience that.
You know, I've talked about how moved I was. I'm just curious, for each of you, I guess, what was, you know, the most compelling takeaway from this film? Could I ask, you know, each of you to expound on that?
Well, I find that, you know, just like I said earlier, that to sort of understand the kind of vulnerability and risk, and, you know, whether you're conscious of it or not, to pursue your creativity or art in general, or to pursue the life of expressing yourself through art, is something, you know, once somebody becomes a fully formed artist, you kind of take it for granted, and you don't really acknowledge, you know, where people come from, and the kind of decision that is to do that with one's life. So to see Bowie in this vulnerability, and the idea that David Bowie was at one time unsure of himself and even annoying, was sort of was kind of, you know, a revelation, because anybody who chooses a creative life, you know, we don't really want to think about that in our own world. But if I think about what I was like on stage, you know, 30 years ago, or any actor, you know, in their first roles, it's ridiculous. And why wouldn't you be ashamed of it? So embracing that vulnerability of not knowing how to be who you are, or how to execute your craft, I think was a powerful thing to capture.
And Jena, what was the takeaway for you from this film?
I mean, I agree. I was just thinking about it earlier, where I was like, you know, sort of on that cusp point in a young person's life, when they're sort of trying to figure out, you know, what to do, who they are, you know, how to sort of best support their energy. A lot of people recommend the book Letters to a Young Poet, right? It's like a very like supportive, journeying sort of thing. But really what the other side is sort of this film is like, but it could also be messy, sloppy, strange, demonstrative, vulnerable, you know, like, awkward, dirty. That type of transformational time, when you're sort of choosing like when you're at a place where you're like, do I believe in myself? And not only do I believe in myself, but do I deserve this? You know, do I deserve this sort of hard and embattled journey of being a storyteller, really? I like that this film kind of sits in a similar place, and there's not that many stories that can sort of allow the mess of it, you know, and the wreck of it. And I think that Gabriel and everyone does a really good job at that.
That's beautiful. And Johnny, what about, you know, for you, not only as an actor, but also as an artist and a musician?
Was a chance to remember, I mean, what, you know, Jena and Marc both touched on, but I love that. I remember everyone asking me in my early 20s, like, but what are you going to do? Are you going to be an actor? Are you going to be a musician? What kind of music are you going to make? I was like, I don't know. And I found that really oppressive. And I thought that I had to have that all worked out. And actually David didn't have that worked out. And then he demonstrated, he created something new. And that's the nature of these, you know, you get these fantastic innovators who capture things. And then everyone goes, oh, wow, that we needed that in the universe. And nobody questions it afterwards. But until they've done it, everyone's questioning them, trying to kind of pinion them to a path that they haven't forged yet. And I think it is for artists to remember that they have the power to do something that other people can't do. You know, the critics and the people who are trying to kind of sell that stuff. Anyway, it was really cool, and yeah, it was cool to remember that that's what happens, and we need innovators. And I think the modern world and the way the internet works and cancel culture and all that stuff, it's being eroded, that culture of allowing the space for innovation. So it was fun to tell a story based on that.
Well, that's a great segue into Gabriel, because I feel like this is such an innovative film in terms of, you know, what we think of about a music movie.
Gosh, I mean, I am so grateful for having these three guys on the movie, because it would have been impossible with anyone else, because it was just so intense shooting it in that short a period of time. So I guess, you know, you'd be unsurprised to hear that the thing that every independent filmmaker always wants is more time to make the movie. But I mean, it you know, the kind of combination of the circumstances of, you know, of the budget we had, of the schedule we had, of, you know, the sort of decision to, you know, choose this very distinct chapter of his life, all of that actually just created a real focus that that I think, you know, that I really enjoyed, and that, you know, I think it made for a great dynamic, you know, with everyone, with on set, you know, and the post, right through to finishing the film. So yeah, I mean, it was, I guess, what would I take away? I would take away that yeah, you know, focusing on this one moment, I think was the right decision, you know, and I was just blessed to have the most amazing cast to do it with.
Well, it's such a, you know, special and innovative film. Thank you so much. And on behalf of the SAG-AFTRA Foundation, I would like to thank Marc, Maron, Johnny, Flynn, Gabriel Range, and Jena Malone for joining us today. And I hope everyone sees Stardust. It's just such a wonderful look at David Bowie. Thank you all again, and take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Take care.
take care. Bye.
See you later.